Everything you learned in school about history, most of it is wrong. Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, Napoleon wasn't short, and Columbus definitely didn't discover America. In fact, he never even set foot in North America. But here's what's really terrifying. These aren't just innocent mistakes. These are lies that have been repeated so many times by so many people for so long that they've become accepted as fact. They're in textbooks, they're in movies, they're taught to children around the world. Today, we're destroying 20 of the biggest historical lies ever told. And by the end of this video, you'll question everything you thought you knew about the past. Let's start with the most obvious one. Lie number 1. Columbus discovered America. Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. You learned this in elementary school. You probably even sang a song about it. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Except he didn't discover anything. America wasn't lost. Millions of people already lived here. The Norse had visited 500 years earlier, and Columbus himself never actually reached mainland North America. He landed in the Caribbean. But here's the part they really don't tell you. Columbus was a brutal colonizer who enslaved, tortured, and murdered indigenous people. His own crew members testified against him for his cruelty. He was arrested and brought back to Spain in chains. Yet, somehow, we celebrate Columbus Day. We erected statues. We named cities after him. All based on a lie. Lie number 2. Vikings wore horned helmets. Every Viking in every movie wears a horned helmet. It's the defining image of Norse warriors. Fierce, terrifying, iconic, completely made up. Archaeological evidence shows no Viking helmet ever had horns. None, zero. The few Viking helmets we found are simple, practical designs made for actual combat. Horns would be tactically stupid. They give your enemy something to grab, they add weight, and they serve no defensive purpose. So where did this image come from? An 1876 opera production of Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. The costume designer thought horned helmets looked dramatic, and for 150 years, we've been stuck with this fictional image that has nothing to do with actual history. Lie number 3. Napoleon was short. Napoleon Bonaparte, short man with a massive ego overcompensating for his tiny stature by conquering Europe. The original short man syndrome was literally named after him. Napoleon was 5'7". That's average height for a French man in the early 1800s. He was actually slightly above average. So why do we think he was short? British propaganda. France and Britain were enemies. British cartoonists drew Napoleon as a tiny, childish figure to mock him. The nickname Little Corporal didn't refer to his height. It was a term of endearment from his soldiers, meaning he'd risen from common ranks. But propaganda works. 200 years later, we still believe the lie. Lie number 4. Medieval people thought the earth was flat. In the Middle Ages, everyone thought the earth was flat. Columbus had to convince people he wouldn't sail off the edge of the world. Medieval people were ignorant and superstitious. This is completely false. Educated people have known the earth is round since ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference in 240 BCE with remarkable accuracy. Medieval scholars, monks, and navigators all knew the Earth was spherical. The flat Earth myth was invented in the 1800s by writers trying to make the medieval period look backward to contrast with modern scientific progress. It was propaganda designed to make us feel superior to our ancestors. They weren't stupid. We've just been lied to about them.
Lie number 5. The pyramids were built by slaves. The pyramids of Egypt were built by thousands of Hebrew slaves under the cruel whips of Pharaoh's overseers. We've all seen the movies, Charlton Heston, the brutal treatment, the suffering. Archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. The pyramids were built by paid laborers, skilled workers who lived in nearby workers' villages. We found their tombs, their tools, their medical records. They received health care. They ate well, meat regularly, which was expensive. They were buried with honor near the pyramids they built. Yes, it was hard labor, but these weren't slaves. They were something closer to a national workforce engaged in a massive public works project. The Hebrew enslavement story doesn't even match the timeline of when the pyramids were built. Hollywood lied to you, and it became history. Lie number 6. People in the past died at 30. Life expectancy in medieval times was 30 to 35 years. People were elderly in their 30s. They didn't live long lives like we do. This is one of the most misunderstood statistics in history. Life expectancy was low because infant and child mortality was incredibly high. If you survived childhood, you'd likely live into your 60s or 70s. Medieval people regularly became grandparents. We have countless historical records of people living into their 70s and 80s. The statistic is an average. It includes all the babies who died before age 5. When you remove childhood mortality, lifespans were much closer to modern ones, just with more danger from disease and injury. Your medieval ancestors weren't dying of old age at 35. That's a mathematical misunderstanding that became accepted as fact. Lie number 8. Einstein failed math. Einstein, the greatest scientific mind of the 20th century, failed math as a child. Even geniuses struggle. There's hope for all of us. Except Einstein never failed math. Ever. He was excellent at mathematics from an early age. By age 12, he'd taught himself calculus. He struggled with French and some other subjects, but mathematics, he excelled. This myth seems to have started from a misunderstanding of the German grading system, where a 6 was the highest mark, but in other systems, it's the lowest. Someone mixed this up, and suddenly Einstein was failing the subject he mastered. We want the story to be true because it's comforting, but it's not true. Einstein was always brilliant at math. Lie number 8. Spartans threw weak babies off cliffs. Sparta, the ultimate warrior society. They examined every newborn, and any baby deemed weak or deformed was thrown from a cliff on Mount Taygetus. Only the strong survived. Archaeological evidence? 0 dead babies at the bottom of the cliff. This story comes from Plutarch, writing 600 years after Sparta's peak, repeating stories he'd heard. Modern excavations of the supposed cliff have found adult remains, likely criminals, but no evidence of mass infanticide. Sparta was harsh, absolutely, but this particular story appears to be exaggerated propaganda, possibly Spartan boasting about their toughness, or Athenian propaganda about Spartan cruelty. Either way, it's not supported by physical evidence.
Lie number 9. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." During the French Revolution, when told the peasants had no bread, Queen Marie Antoinette callously replied, "Let them eat cake." It perfectly captured her out-of-touch arrogance. She never said it. This phrase appears in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's autobiography, written when Marie Antoinette was only 9 years old and not yet queen. He attributed it to a great princess, but not by name, and it was already a cliché about out-of-touch royalty. The phrase was weaponized against Marie Antoinette during the Revolution as propaganda to justify her execution. It worked. People still quote it today as if it's real. She was executed based partly on lies, and we're still repeating them. Lie number 10. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. It's so massive, so impressive, that astronauts can see it from orbit. Astronauts have repeatedly confirmed, no, you cannot see the Great Wall from space.
From low Earth orbit, you can see cities, highways, and airports, but the Great Wall is too narrow and blends with the surrounding terrain. Astronaut Chris Hadfield spent months on the International Space Station specifically looking for it. He couldn't find it without magnification. This myth predates space travel. It was invented in the 1700s as a way to emphasize the wall's magnificence. Once humans actually went to space, they discovered it wasn't true. But the lie had a 200-year head start. Lie number 11. Witches were burned at the stake in Salem. The Salem witch trials, hysterical accusations, innocent women burned alive at the stake, mass hysteria in colonial Massachusetts. Nobody was burned in Salem, not one person. The Salem witch trials resulted in 20 executions, 19 by hanging, 1 by pressing, being crushed under stones. Burning witches was a European practice, but it was rare even there. In America, it didn't happen. But burning witches sounds more dramatic, so that's the image we have. Movies show flames, popular culture depicts pyres. The actual historical method, hanging, doesn't fit our imagination of witch trials. So we remember the dramatic fiction instead of the tragic reality. Lie number 12. Medieval people didn't bathe. Medieval people were filthy. They never bathed. They threw their waste in the streets. They were walking disease vectors who didn't understand basic hygiene. Medieval people bathed regularly. Public bathhouses were common in medieval cities. People washed frequently, often daily if water was available. They understood cleanliness, though their methods differed from ours. The idea that medieval people were uniquely filthy is Renaissance propaganda, later periods depicting earlier ones as backward to make themselves look advanced. The real hygiene crisis came later, during the 1500s to 1700s, when bathing fell out of fashion among European aristocracy. Medieval peasants were often cleaner than Renaissance nobles. History is more complicated than we've been told.
Lie number 13. Iron Maidens were medieval torture devices. The Iron Maiden, a coffin-shaped torture device lined with spikes. Close the door, and the victim is impaled from all sides. The ultimate medieval torture device, representing the cruelty of the Dark Ages. Iron Maidens weren't used in medieval times. They were invented in the 1800s. These devices were created by hoaxers and showmen in the 19th century to attract tourists and museum visitors. People wanted to believe the medieval period was barbaric, so entrepreneurs built fake torture devices and claimed they were authentic historical artifacts. No medieval source mentions Iron Maidens. No archaeological evidence supports their use. They're entirely fabricated, Victorian-era torture porn passed off as history. Lie number 15. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Emperor Nero played his fiddle and sang while Rome burned in the Great Fire of 64 AD, demonstrating his mad indifference to his people's suffering. Fiddles didn't exist in ancient Rome. They weren't invented for another 1,000 years. Nero was actually outside Rome when the fire started. When he learned of it, he rushed back and organized relief efforts. He opened his palaces to refugees and distributed food. Contemporary accounts suggest he responded reasonably well to the crisis. The fiddling story was created by his enemies after his death to cement his reputation as a tyrant. It worked. 2,000 years later, Nero fiddling while Rome burns is still our metaphor for indifferent leadership, political propaganda that outlasted an empire. Lie number 15. George Washington had wooden teeth. George Washington had wooden dentures. His famous stoic expression in portraits was because his wooden teeth were uncomfortable. Washington's dentures were made from ivory, metal, and actual human teeth, possibly from enslaved people, but not wood. He did have terrible dental problems and wore various dentures throughout his life, but wooden teeth would splinter, rot, and be completely impractical.
His actual dentures were uncomfortable, which is why he rarely smiled, but they weren't wooden. This myth likely started because ivory can stain and look wood-like. Someone made an assumption, and it became fact. Lie number 17. Medieval chastity belts prevented adultery. Knights going off to the Crusades locked their wives in metal chastity belts to ensure fidelity, literal locked metal underwear that prevented any sexual activity. These devices were mostly Victorian-era hoaxes. A few medieval references exist, but they appear to be jokes or metaphors, not actual devices. The elaborate locking metal contraptions in museums were manufactured in the 1800s as curiosities or as anti-masturbation devices. The Victorians were weird about sex. Medieval people weren't stupid. They understood that a locked metal device worn for months would cause serious infections and health problems. The chastity belt is Victorian fantasy about medieval prudishness, not medieval reality. Line number 18. Edison invented the light bulb. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, bringing light to the world through his genius and hard work. Edison didn't invent the light bulb. He improved and commercialized it. At least 20 people developed electric lighting before Edison did. Humphrey Davy created the first electric light in 1802. Joseph Swan patented a light bulb in Britain before Edison did. Edison's contribution was making a practical, long-lasting, commercially viable bulb and building the infrastructure to deliver electricity. This isn't to diminish Edison, that's still impressive, but we've given him credit for invention when his real talent was innovation and business. We've erased the actual inventors from history. Lie number 19. The forbidden fruit was an apple. In the Garden of Eden, Eve ate an apple from the tree of knowledge, tempted by the serpent, causing humanity's fall from grace. The Bible never says it was an apple. The Hebrew text just says fruit. The apple association came much later, possibly from a Latin translation, where evil, malum, and apple, malum, are the same word. Medieval artists painted apples because apples were familiar. It could have been a fig, a pomegranate, or something that doesn't exist anymore. We don't know, but we're so certain it was an apple that we call it Adam's apple in anatomy and use apple imagery for temptation. A translation coincidence became biblical fact. Lie number 20. History is written by the victors. We all know this quote. It means the winners control the narrative, and we only hear their side of the story. But this itself is misleading. History is written by writers, sometimes winners, sometimes losers, sometimes neutral observers. We have extensive historical records from defeated civilizations. We know about Carthage despite Rome destroying it. We know about Native American perspectives despite European conquest. We know about the Holocaust despite Nazi attempts to hide it. The truth is more complex. History is written by those with resources, education, and access to preservation. Sometimes that's victors, often it's not. This quote, often attributed to Winston Churchill but with no confirmed source, has become an excuse to dismiss historical records entirely. It's all lies anyway, right? Wrong. History is complicated. Sources are biased, but that doesn't mean we can't know anything about the past. It means we have to think critically about sources, cross-reference, and understand context. Which brings us full circle. 20 lies, some small, some massive, some innocent misunderstandings, others deliberate propaganda. All of them repeated so often they became accepted as truth. So what's the lesson here? First, question everything. Just because something is repeated in textbooks, movies, and classrooms doesn't make it true. History is constantly being revised as we discover new evidence and recognize old biases. Second, understand that much of what we call history is actually narrative, stories we tell ourselves about the past, shaped by the needs and prejudices of the present. The Vikings got horned helmets because an opera designer thought they looked cool. Marie Antoinette got let them eat cake because revolutionaries needed to justify her execution.
Third, recognize that we're probably doing the same thing right now. Future generations will look back at what we believe today and wonder how we got it so wrong. Some of what you learned in this video might turn out to be revised or corrected as new evidence emerges. History isn't a fixed set of facts. It's an ongoing conversation between the present and the past. And that conversation requires us to be skeptical, curious, and willing to admit when we've been wrong. So the next time someone tells you a historical fact that sounds too perfect, too dramatic, too convenient, question it. Look for sources. Consider who benefits from that particular narrative. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that humans are really good at believing lies, especially when those lies are repeated often enough. Thanks for watching. If this video made you question what else you've been told, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we're tackling historical facts about famous scientists that are completely made up. And leave a comment. Which of these lies shocked you most? What other historical facts do you think are actually fiction? See you in the next one.